Chapter 1 of William the Conqueror. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by David Wales. William the Conqueror by Richmal Crompton. Chapter 1. Enter the Sweep. William and the Sweep took to one another at once. William liked the Sweep's coloring, and the Sweep liked William's conversation. William looked up to the Sweep as a being of a superior order. "Didn't your mother mind you being a Sweep?" he said wonderingly, as the Sweep unpacked his brushes. "Nah," said the Sweep slowly and thoughtfully. "Leastways, she didn't say nothing." "You don't want a partner, do you?" said William. "I wouldn't mind being a Sweep. I'd come and live with you and go round with you every day." "Oh, thanks," said the man, "but perhaps your pa would have something to say." William laughed bitterly and scornfully. "Oh, yes, they'd fuss. They fuss if I get a bit of mud on my boots. As if their old drawing-room carpet mattered. Have you any little boys?" "Yes, 3," said the Sweep. "I suppose they'll all be sweeps," said William gloomily, feeling that the profession was becoming overcrowded. "Come out of that room, Master William," called the cook, who, in the absence of William's parents, took what William considered a wholly unjustifiable interest in him. William extended his tongue in the direction of the voice. Otherwise, he ignored it. "I'd meant to be a robber," went on William, "but I think I'd as soon be a sweep. Or I might be a sweep first and then a robber." "Come out of that room, Master William," called cook. William simulated deafness. "I'd like to be a sweep and a robber and a detective and a soldier and some more things. I think I'd better be them about a year each, so's I can get 'em all in." Said the Sweep. "There's something in that." Cook appeared in the doorway. "Didn't you hear me calling you to come out of that room, Master William?" she said pugnaciously. "You can't expect me to hear you when you go shouting about in the kitchen," said William loftily. "I just heard you shouting. Well, come out of this room anyway." "How can you expect me to know how it's done if I don't stay to watch? What's the good of me going to be a sweep if I don't know how it's done?" "What's the good of me covering up all the furniture if you're going to stay here getting black as pitch? Are you coming out?" "No," said William, exasperated. "I've gotter stay and learn. It's just the same as Robert going to college, my staying to watch the Sweep. What's the good of me being a sweep if I don't learn? Folks probably won't pay me if I didn't know how to do it, and then what'd I do?" "Very well, Master William," said cook with treacherous sweetness. "I'll tell your pa when he comes in that you stayed in here with the Sweep when your ma said most special you wasn't to." William reconsidered this aspect of affairs. "All right, Crabby," he said grudgingly, "and I hope that I jolly well spoil your chimney when I'm a sweep with not knowing how to do it." He wandered round the house and watched through the window. It was a thrilling performance. He was lost in roseate dreams of himself pursuing the gloriously dirty calling of chimney sweep, when the Sweep appeared with a heavy sack. "Where shall I put the soot?" he said. William considered. There was a nice bit of waste ground behind the summer house. He looked carefully round to make sure that his arch-enemy cook was nowhere in sight. "Oh, just here," he said, leading the Sweep round to the summer house. The Sweep emptied the sack. It was a soft, gray-black pile. William thrilled with the pride of possession. "That's mine, isn't it?" he said. "Well, it's not mine," said the Sweep jocularly. "You can have it to practice on." He left William smiling proudly above his pile. From over the wall, behind the summer house, William could see the road. He waved his hand effusively to the Sweep as he passed on his little cart. "I say," called William. The Sweep drew up. "Does the horse and cart cost much?" said William anxiously. "Oh, no," said the Sweep. "You can get 'em dirt cheap. I'll lend you this here of mine when you go into the business." With a facetious wink he drove on. and William returned to the contemplation of his pile of soot. Soon a whistle that he knew roused him from his reverie, and he peeped over the wall. Ginger, William's lifelong friend and ally, as earnest and freckled and snub-nosed as William himself, was passing down the road. He looked up at William. "Hello," said William, with modest pride. "I got a bit of soot in here." But Ginger had a rival attraction. "They're ratting in Cuban's barn," he said. William weighed the attraction of ratting and soot, and finally decided in favor of ratting. "All right," he called. "Wait a sec, I'll come." He completely forgot his soot till tea time. Then, as he was going out of the house, he met Mr. and Miss Arnold Fox coming in. They were coming to call on Mrs. Brown. Both were very tall and very thin, and both possessed expansive smiles that revealed perfect sets of false teeth. "Good afternoon, William," said Mr. Fox politely. "Afternoon," said William. "A rough diamond, William?" smiled Mr. Fox to his sister. William glared at him. She laid her hand on William's head. "Manners maketh a man, dear William," she said. She then bent down and kissed William. Mr. Arnold Fox took off his hat and playfully extinguished William with it. Then he laid it on the hall table and went into the drawing-room, leaving William boiling and enraged on the doorstep. That reminded William of his soot. William and Ginger sat lazily upon the wall, watching the passers-by. Absent-mindedly they toyed with handfuls of soot. They were cheered by the sight of Mr. Arnold Fox going down the road, his forehead beneath his hat suspiciously dark. "That'll teach him. He'll take some washing," said William. "Look," said Ginger excitedly, leaning over the wall. Along the road came 3 children in white, Geoffrey Spencer and Joan Bell, with her little sister Mary. Geoffrey Spencer, in a white sailor suit, walked along mincingly, holding Joan Bell's little bag purse for her. Mary toddled along, holding her elder sister's hand. William admired Joan intensely. Occasionally she condescended to notice his existence. "Hello," called William. "Where are you going?" "Posting a letter," said Geoffrey primly. "Come in and play," said William. "We've got some soot." "No," said Geoffrey piously. "Mother said I wasn't to play with you." "You're so rough!" exclaimed Joan, with a little fastidious sniff. William flushed beneath his soot. He felt that this reflected upon his character. He was annoyed that anyone, even so insignificant an anyone as Geoffrey, should be forbidden to play with him. "Rough!" he said indignantly. Then, "Well, I'd rather be rough than an old softy like you and your old white suit." "Come along, Joan," said Geoffrey with a superior smile. "I'm not going to talk to him." William rolled white, angry eyes in his black face. "Boo, softy," he called over the wall. Yet he was depressed by the proceeding, and even Ginger's suggestion of trying the effect of the soot on the bed of arum lilies did not revive him much. However, the effect was certainly cheering. So they moved on to the white roses and worked with the pure joy of the artist on them till they heard the dulcet tones of Joan and Mary and Geoffrey returning from the post. Then they went back to the wall. Joan was growing bored with Geoffrey. She looked up almost longingly towards William's grimy face. "Where is your soot, William?" she said. "Just here," said William. "It's jolly good soot." "I'll come and look at it," she said condescendingly. "I won't come in and play. I'll come in and look at it. You can go on home, Geoffrey." Geoffrey debated with his conscience. "I won't come in," he said, "'cause mother says he's so rough. I'll wait for you out here." So, hand in hand, Joan and Mary came round to the back of the summer house. William and Ginger proudly introduced them to the soot. "It's lovely," said Mary. Let's dance around it, holding hands." "All right," said William genially. "Come on." Nothing loath, they joined hands and danced around it. Joan laughed excitedly. "Oh, it's fun!" she cried. "Faster!" "Father!" cried Mary. They went faster and faster. William and Ginger, with the male's innate desire of showing off his prowess, began to revolve at lightning speed. Then came the catastrophe. Plop! It was Mary who lost her balance and fell suddenly and violently on her face into the heap of soot. Joan, with feminine inconsistency, turned upon William, stamping her foot. "You did it, you nasty, rough, horrible boy!" "I didn't." "You did." "He didn't," said Ginger. "He did." "He didn't." Meanwhile, Mary had arisen from the soot heap, hair, eyes, and mouth full of soot, soot clinging to her dress. Her voice joined in the general uproar. "Oh, it tastes nasty! It tastes nasty! Oh!" Joan wept in angry sympathy. "See how you like soot in your mouth, you nasty boy!" she screamed at William, seizing a handful of soot and hurling it at William's face. That was the beginning of the battle. Geoffrey, hearing the noise, came nobly to the rescue, to be received by a handful of soot from Ginger. It was a glorious battle. Ginger and William fought Geoffrey, and Joan fought everyone, and Mary sat on the soot heap and screamed. They threw soot till there was practically no soot left to throw. A butcher boy who was passing and heard the noise came in to arbitrate, but stayed to participate. Sheer lust of battle descended upon them all. Then came sudden sanity. In stricken silence they gazed at each other. Joan seized Mary by the hand. She glared round at them all from a small black face framed with grimy curls. "I hate you all," she said, stamping a small black foot. "Hate you all!" screamed Mary, whose tears were making white tracks down her black face. "It wasn't me," said Geoffrey, eagerly and ungrammatically. "I hate you," said Joan, "worse than anybody, worse than William, and worse than anyone, and I'm going home to tell Mother, so there." "So there," wailed Mary in concert. With outraged dignity and clinging soot on every line of her figure, Joan led Mary from the garden. It was more than Geoffrey could bear. He followed them, sobbing loudly, his white suit a cloudy gray-black. Joan's voice floated out on the twilit air. "I'm going to tell Mother. You'll catch it, William Brown." Ginger looked round uneasily. "I'd best be going, William," he murmured. Dejection descended upon William. "All right." Then he looked at Ginger and down at himself. "Funny how it gets all over you," he said. "And don't it make your eyes look queer?" "Am I as bad as you?" said Ginger, apprehensively. "Worse," said William. "Will it come off with cold water?" "Dunno," said William. "I'll give it," said Ginger, "a jolly good try. What'll your folks say?" "Dunno," said William. "Well, good night, William." "Good night," said William, despondently. Dusk had fallen. He crept round to the back door, hoping to slip up the back stairs unobserved. But Cook's strident voice came from the library. "Mrs. Bell wants you on the telephone at once, please. It's something about Master William." William beat a hasty retreat to the laurel bushes. Then, hearing footsteps on the drive, he stood on tiptoe and peered out. He met the horrified gaze of the housemaid, who was returning from her afternoon out. With a wild yell, she ran like an arrow towards the back door. "Oh, Lord! Oh, Lord!" she cried. "I seed the devil! I seed him in the garden!" William, among the laurel bushes, smiled proudly to himself. Then he sat down cross-legged in his retreat, black face on black hands, gleaming white eyes gazing dreamily into the distance. He was not building castles in the air. He was not repenting of his sins. He was not thinking about future retribution. He was merely deciding that he wouldn't be a sweep after all. It did taste so nasty. End of chapter 1. Chapter 2 of William the Conqueror by Richmal Crompton. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 2, A Birthday Treat. "What we gonna do this afternoon?" demanded William of his boon companions, the outlaws. They felt that as far as the morning was concerned, they had pretty well exhausted the resources of the universe. They had fished in the pond with bent pins, which were attached to the end of strings, which were attached to the end of sticks, and they had caught a large variety of water weeds and one sardine can. Douglas said that he caught a fish which escaped before he could draw in his line, but this statement was greeted with open incredulity by the others. "A jolly big one, too," said Douglas, unconsciously following in the footsteps of older adherents to the piscatorial art. "Oh, yes," said William sarcastically, "so big that none of us could see it. If it was as big as what you say it is, why didn't you tell us? Then we could have had a look at it." "I didn't want to scare it away," said Douglas indignantly. Then, with a faint emulation of William's sarcasm, "Fancy you not knowing that. Fancy you not knowing that fishes get scared with you shouting and yelling about. I'm not surprised that you only catch old tins and things that can't hear you shouting and yelling about. I should think all the fishes for miles around got headaches the way you've been shouting and yelling about. I know the one I caught looked as if he got a headache with it." William was taken aback by this outburst, but he quickly recovered. "Oh, yes, I dare say it looked pretty funny altogether, the one you caught. I'm sure if you caught a fish at all, it was a pretty funny one." "Do you say I didn't catch a fish?" said Douglas, furiously squaring up to William. "I say no one saw your old fish, and you ought to ask your mother to buy you a pair of spectacles so as you can see what is fish and what's your own imagination." Ginger and Henry sat on the ground to watch the fight. It was not a long one, because Douglas lost his footing soon after they had begun, and fell into the pond, and was rescued by William, and the excitement of this proceeding dimmed the memory of Douglas's alleged catch. Then Henry thought that he saw a rabbit on the edge of the wood. So the outlaws invaded the wood in a body with Jumbo, William's mongrel, at their head. Jumbo hunted imaginary rabbits with yelps and barks and futile rushes, and the outlaws urged him on with war whoops and cries of "Good old Jumbo! Fetch him out!" Jumbo caught and dismembered a leaf, after pursuing it with wild excitement from tree to tree in the breeze, worried a clump of fungus, pricked his nose badly on a holly bush, and retired to bark defiance at it from a safe distance. Tiring of rabbit hunting, the outlaws climbed trees, and when Ginger had torn his coat, and Henry split his knickers with the effort of attaining dangerous heights, they abandoned that occupation. They tracked each other with much ostentatious secrecy and noisy silence, and crawled about on stomachs and sibilant, whispering and shh, and stepping upon twigs and exclamations. Finally, they were chased into the road again by a furious keeper, and were given a ride in a farm wagon by a passing laborer, who was blessed with a good nature and rather liked the daredevil looks of the outlaws. William, drunk with ecstasy, drove, and narrowly escaped precipitating the equipage into the ditch, and Ginger, while experimenting how far he could lean out at the back without falling, overbalanced and fell into the road. He climbed back cheerful and unhurt, if somewhat disheveled. Arriving at the village, they descended with much exuberant thanks, and made their way to the disused barn that was the scene of most of their activities. There they had a shooting match with the homemade bows and arrows that they kept concealed at the back of the barn. After breaking the window of a neighboring cottage by accident, they fled to the other end of the village, where they watched the blacksmith shoeing a horse. Ginger, to his great delight, was allowed to hold the hammer for a minute. This made him rather uppish, and his subsequent boasts of the honor thus paid him annoyed the other outlaws so much that they all sat upon him, literally, in the ditch till he promised as well as his mouthful of mud would allow him not to mention it again. It had been, on the whole, a thoroughly satisfactory morning. A similar afternoon was hardly to be hoped for, but the outlaws were notoriously optimistic. "What we going to do this afternoon?" repeated William. A look of despondency came over Ginger's face. "Gotter stay in at home," he said mournfully. "Why?" said the outlaws. "Gotter not comin' to stay. She's not comin' till tea time, but they say they want her to see me clean, so I gotter stay in clean all afternoon." There was a murmur of indignation at this inhuman cruelty. "Just like grown-ups," said William bitterly. "What's your aunt like?" said Henry with interest. "Sort of one who gives decent tips?" The outlaws always went shares on tips, and therefore each one took a personal interest in the visits of the other's members' relations. "Never seen her before," said Ginger disconsolately. "Don't know what she's like." "Sure to be awful," said Douglas unfeelingly. "But we don't mind that if she gives a decent tip," added Henry. "Oh, no," said Ginger bitterly. "You don't mind. You've not got to sit all afternoon clean and doing nothing, have you? Oh, no, I'm sure you don't mind." "She might possibly be nice," said William, without much conviction. "Oh, yes, she might," said Ginger, still more bitterly. "So easy for you to talk, isn't it? You don't mind. Oh, no, and she might be nice. Oh, yes, you'd talk like that if it was your aunt what was coming, and you what had to sit clean all afternoon, wouldn't you?" When roused, Ginger could emulate William's sarcastic manner rather well. The afternoon passed happily enough. William, Douglas, and Henry practiced lassoing Jumbo in the backyard of William's house. Jumbo enjoyed the game immensely. The lasso never caught him, but occasionally he caught the lasso, and worried it zestfully. When, however, they had by mistake lassoed a flower pot onto and through the glass of a cucumber frame, the outlaws very quietly left the precincts of William's home, and spent the rest of the afternoon sliding down a battered hayrick in one of Farmer Jenks' fields, and bringing down a considerable portion of hay with each descent. At intervals they thought of Ginger sitting in solitary cleanliness and boredom in his family's drawing-room, waiting for his aunt. "Poor old Ginger," said Henry, as he descended from the hayrick with a bump. "She'll have come by now, perhaps," said Douglas. "Hope she's rich," said William cheerfully. "Let go and look at her," said Henry. The idea appealed to the outlaws, and they set off at once for Ginger's house. Dusk was falling when they reached it. They crept round to the back of the house, where they knew that Ginger's drawing-room window was. There they crouched among the ivy and peered cautiously into the lighted window. The first thing they saw was Ginger, dressed in his best suit, made unfamiliar with gleaming cleanliness of face and collar, sitting on a chair opposite the window. The first thing they noticed was that he was not looking bored. He was, in fact, beaming delightedly, though he had not yet seen his friends. Then the eyes of the outlaws wandered across to Ginger's aunt. She was sitting in front of the fire. The outlaws' eyes and mouths grew wide as they watched. Their noses were pressed flat against the window-pane. For Ginger's aunt was young and radiantly pretty. "Crumbs!" gasped William ecstatically. Ginger found himself unusually and unexpectedly popular the next day. "Hello, Ginger." "Good morning, Ginger." "How's your aunt, Ginger?" Ginger at first suspected sarcasm in this question, then realized with surprise that there was none. "Very well," he said laconically. "She's a jolly lot better than I thought she was going to be." Nicer than you thought she was going to be, repeated William sternly. You're jolly well not to talk like that about her. You don't deserve her, that's what it is. You don't deserve an aunt like what she is. You don't know anything about her, said Ginger, amazed and indignant. Oh, don't I? Said William. I bet I do. I bet I know all there is to know about her. I bet I know she's beauteous and good and good and beauteous. Here, interrupted Ginger pugnaciously. What, you talking like that about her? She's not your aunt, she's mine. I'll fight you for her, said William. All right, agreed Ginger, taking off his coat. They fought, and William won. Now she's my aunt, said William complacently, as he put on his coat and felt tenderly and proudly a fast-swelling eye with his grimy hand. Well, you can call her your aunt, said Ginger, but the fact remains she's my father's sister. But I've fought you for her, said William indignantly. All right, agreed Ginger. I said she was your aunt, all right, but if you want her to be your father's sister, you'll have to get your father to fight my father for her, and even then I don't see— Let's have her for all our aunts, suggested Douglas pacifically. It's her birthday next week, added Ginger, while she's staying with us. I say, said William, as though struck by a sudden brilliant idea, let's get up a sort of treat for her. Crumbs, said the outlaws. Yes, let's. What'll we have? Said Henry brightly. A picnic? No, said William decidedly. The only decent picnic places are trespass places, and probably she can't run as fast as when we can if anyone comes. Let's act something, said Douglas. Don't forget she's my aunt, said Ginger proudly. I mean William's aunt, he corrected himself, as he met William's eye. William's aunt and my father's sister. What'll we act? Said Henry. Oh, anything's easy to act. Just make something up or do something out of a book. Means learning, said Ginger despondently, just like lessons. Might well be doing history or geography as learning acting stuff. We needn't learn it, said Douglas. We can just make it up as we go along. Well, you know what that's like, said Ginger sternly. You orter, anyway, 'cause we've done it. You just don't know what to say when it comes to the time, or someone else says the thing you wanted to say, and you interrupt each other and get fighting. It won't be much of a birthday treat for my aunt. I mean, William's aunt and my father's sister. Well, let's do it dumb show then, said Douglas. Let's act without speaking. Just move our arms and legs about and things like that, and— He stopped. The outlaws were looking at William. Upon William's freckled, homely countenance was dawning an expression that those who knew him recognized as inspiration. At last he spoke. I know, he said. Waxworks. Crumbs, chorused the outlaws in delight. Waxworks. What'll we be? Said Henry. People out of history? If you know enough history to go acting, you can, said William scathingly. Well, we could have someone being murdered or hung or something. It'd be sort of exciting. Well, who was murdered or hung? Henry VIII? No, he wasn't then. He was the one what had 7 wives. You're getting a bit muddled. That was a man going to St. Ives. No, it wasn't neither. It was Henry VIII. Anyway, we've not enough to do Henry VIII and 7 wives. Yes, one of us could be Henry VIII and another could be the 7 wives. We could have a label round his neck with 7 wives wrote on. Well, we're not going to. We'd rather have someone being murdered some way. Well, let Henry VIII murder his 7 wives. Oh, do shut up about Henry VIII. Who was murdered in history? Charles the something. Charles the First. We did him last week. His head was chopped off, and he said he was sorry he took such a long time dying of it and keeping everybody waiting. Hanging'd be easier for waxwork, said William thoughtfully, 'cause your head wouldn't have to come off. They could just give a deep and holler groan and close their eyes. Yes, we'll have, who did you say it was being hung for one? We'll have to get a bit of string for it from somewhere, and we've got a crown somewhere in our house, what Ethel once had. We'll just have to practice a bit, that's all. Ginger be, who did you say? The man, you know, in a crown and a dressing gown or a mackintosh or something, and Douglas be the policeman with a bit of string hanging him. Well, that's that one. We'll have to practice moving jerky, that's all. We'd better not have any more history. She mayn't be much interested in history. She didn't look as if she'd be interested in history. She looked awful nice. What do we have next, then? Let's have something funny. Let's have old General Mould walking. I can do him. As a matter of fact, William could do the half-strut, half-run that was General Mould's normal mode of procedure to the life. That oughter make her laugh, he added complacently. And what else do we have? Said Douglas. Not much so far. Well, we can't arrange a whole long performance in one breath, said William sternly. We got to think a bit. There was a short silence, tense with mental effort. Then Ginger said, I know. Let's have Dick Turpin holding up a coach. I've got her pistol and some caps. And we could borrow a wheelbarrow for the coach, suggested Douglas excitedly. Henry be Dick Turpin, said William, and Douglas his horse, and Ginger in the wheelbarrow, and me pushing it, and I'll do the talking in them all. What else will we have? Said Douglas. That'll do to start practicing on, said William. We can think of more things as we go on. Rehearsals in the old barn took place daily. William's mother noticed vaguely that life seemed very peaceful, but she happened to be very busy herself, and had no time to wonder what William was doing. She had become a member of the New Era Society. The New Era Society existed chiefly to educate the village and entice speakers down from London to speak on subjects of which the village knew nothing, either before or after the lectures. The society wanted the village to be in the swim. The kindred expression "at sea" aptly describes the feelings of most of the audience. The subject this month was Egyptology, and in the absence of the secretary, Mrs. Brown, William's mother, and Mrs. Flowerdew, Ginger's mother, were arranging for the speaker. Mrs. Brown was relieved that William seemed suddenly so unobtrusive. In the intervals of hanging Charles I and holding up the stagecoach with strange jerky movements, as demonstrated by William, the outlaws dogged the footsteps of Ginger's aunt. They pursued her in a body, with languishing eyes and bouquets of wild flowers, which were generally also languishing. And, strange to say, Miss Flowerdew liked it. She received the drooping bouquets with profuse thanks. She listened with due and proper excitement to their tales of adventure. She went with Jumble to hunt rats in the barn. Jumble was wildly excited, but a large number of flies was his net bag. They told her that they were arranging a surprise treat for her birthday, and she received the news with delight. "We're not going to tell you what it is," said William, "but it's going to be in the old barn at 4:30, and you can bring any friends you like to it free." "How lovely!" said Miss Flowerdew. "I simply don't know how I can wait till then. I'm sure it will be most exciting." "Oh, yes, it's going to be a jolly good show," said William complacently. During the week they had added to their repertoire Columbus Discovering America and Jonah and the Whale. William was Columbus, and Henry, Douglas, and Ginger, lying on the ground side by side, were America. William's jerky, dumb show of looking for America, shading his eyes and gazing into the distance, and searching upon the ground near his feet, until at last he came upon the three prone forms, and sat down upon them heavily, was considered by the troop to be very good. William was showman as well as actor. As Columbus, he wore his Boy Scout's costume and an old top hat of his father's, to add distinction to the tout ensemble. As Jonah, he wore appropriately a mackintosh and inappropriately an old boudoir cap of his sister's rescued from the rag bag. The latter was supposed to add a biblical touch. Henry, Ginger, and Douglas were the whale. The swallowing of Jonah was almost worthy of the Russian ballet, full of drama and movement and realism. Then the whale, lying upon Jonah, emitted deep groans, and Jonah finally emerged, quite fresh and perky, in his boudoir cap and mackintosh, and swam away, leaving the whale still groaning loudly. "It's going to be a fine show," said William enthusiastically to Miss Flowerdew, after a long and energetic rehearsal. "Bother," said Miss Flowerdew. "I've just discovered that it's the same day as the New Era lecture. But I'll cut that." "Oh, yes," said William. "I simply can't tell you how good ours is going to be. You'll be awfully sorry if you miss it, and it's being all done for you, too." "Oh, I'll come, never fear," said Miss Flowerdew. Mrs. Brown and Mrs. Flowerdew had made all the arrangements for the New Era Society's lecture, except with regard to the hall. There were two halls in the village, the parish room and the village hall, and there was some doubt as to which would be the better for the lecture, and the final arrangement of that had been left to Mrs. Flowerdew. Mrs. Brown had secured as speaker a Professor Smith. The day of the lecture, which was also the day of Miss Flowerdew's birthday and the Waxworth show, arrived. "I don't yet know which room," Mrs. Brown said distractedly at breakfast. "I wish Mrs. Flowerdew would send a message." William was too much intent upon his own thoughts and plans to listen to his mother's jeremiads. He went out into the garden, moving his arms to and fro with eloquent gestures and murmuring, "And now, ladies and gentlemen, kindly allow me to introduce to you King Charles being hung in the Tower by a policeman, like what he was in old days, lifelike and natural. Ladies and gentlemen, kindly notice the policeman tying the string round his neck." He was interrupted by a tall, pale young man who came in at the front gate and said to him, "Are you Mrs. Brown's little boy?" "Yes," said William, ungraciously. "Well, Mrs. Flowerdew says the parish room," said the young man, and hastily departed. Now, the young man did not speak very distinctly, and William's mind and heart were full of Miss Flowerdew. As a matter of fact, William rarely thought of Ginger's mother as Mrs. Flowerdew. She was just Ginger's mother. Also, William's thoughts were full of his waxwork show. William went off to the barn where the rest of the troop were assembled. "I say," said William importantly, "she must have invited a lot of friends. I've just got her message from her to say we're to do it in the parish room and not the old barn. She must have got a lot of people to come and watch." "Crumbs," said the outlaws, deeply gratified. Then they fell to rehearsing with renewed energy. 4:30 arrived. The parish room was filled with a despondent-looking crowd of villagers whipped up by the energetic members of the New Era Society. The village was less anxious to be educated than the society was to educate it. The speaker had arrived and had had lunch with the vicar. He and the vicar were still talking earnestly in the vicar's study. They were discussing the morals of the younger generation. "Terrible," sighed Mr. Monks, the vicar. "The modern child is utterly devoid of those qualities of sensitiveness and humility and reverence that one used to associate with childhood. There is a boy in this very village, a boy of the name of William Brown." He shuddered, as at many painful memories. "I say," said Professor Smith, "it's nearly half-past. Ought we to—" "It only takes a minute across the field," said the vicar. "We'll give them time to settle down. They're never punctual." And he went on talking with deep feeling about the boy of the name of William Brown. The outlaws arrived at the parish room and entered by the door behind the platform. "I say," whispered Ginger, impressed, "it's full. She must have invited a whole lot of 'em." "I can't see her, can you?" said William. "No, but there's such crowds of 'em." "Well, we'd better not keep 'em waiting," said William importantly, and the outlaws marched up on the platform. A gasp of mingled horror and surprise and excitement went up from the audience. The outlaws were wearing the clothes they would need for the Waxworth show. William wore his top hat and scout's costume. Douglas was dressed in readiness for his policeman's scene in a dressing gown and a bread basket. Ginger, in readiness for Charles I, wore a tinsel crown and a shirt of his father's, and Henry, as the highwayman, wore a homemade mask and a paint-smeared overall several sizes too large for him, the property of his father, who fondly imagined it to be still hanging in his studio. William looked around his paralyzed audience. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "this is a Waxworth show 'cause of her birthday, and I'm doing the talking. The first Waxworth is me. I'm not dressed for it, but you can imagine me in a long coat, and I've got these things on for Columbus, and I've not got time to go changing every time. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the only Waxworth show of its kind in the world. We're just going to begin, and if you'll kindly watch careful, this is General Moult walking along the road, lifelike and natural. This is a Waxworth number 1, ladies and gentlemen. This is General Moult walking. Kindly all watch General Moult walking." William assumed the pompous strut well known to all the village, and slowly and jerkily progressed across the stage. The spell was broken. The hall was full of murmurs of mingled consternation and delight, the delight predominating. In the second row sat Mrs. Brown, her eyes full of helpless horror, fixed upon her son. In the third row sat General Moult, his face purple with fury, his eyes bulging. A group of village youths at the back of the hall, reluctantly dragged in to listen to the lecture on Egyptology, began to cheer. William bowed, gratified. "Ladies and gentlemen," he continued, "our second Waxworth is—" "Crumbs!" whispered Ginger, looking at the open door behind the stage. "The vicar's coming with a man. He's going to come right up on the stage. He's going to spoil it all." "No, he's not," said William firmly. "It's our show, and—" Certainly the vicar and the other man were coming up onto the stage. William, with admirable presence of mind, threw himself into the breach. "Ladies and gentlemen, our next Waxworth is Mr. Monk's coming up onto the stage. Kindly notice Mr. Monk's walking up onto the stage." The hall was full of excited murmurs. The figure of the new vicar was seen to appear on the stage, as though in obedience to William's stage directions, and speak to William. The murmurs in the hall were too loud to admit of anyone's hearing what the vicar was saying to William. Everyone was talking excitedly. General Moult had found his voice and was shouting, "Impudence! Damned impudence! I'll tell his father! Confound his impudence! I say confound!" Mrs. Brown was past all power of interference. She merely watched William with a helpless, fascinated look. Above the babble rose William's strident voice. "Waxworth number 3, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. Monk's talking, and Mr. Monk's talking to me. Kindly notice Mr. Monk's talking to me, ladies and gentlemen, natural-like and lifelike." The youths in the back of the stage applauded frenziedly. William bowed. The vicar began to lose his self-control. He hit the palm of his left hand with his right clenched fist as he expostulated. William imitated the gesture. "Waxworth number 4, ladies and gentlemen," he shouted. "Mr. Monk's doing this. Kindly notice Mr. Monk's doing this. Lifelike and natural." Mr. Monk's caught hold of William's collar. "Waxworth number 5, shouted William hoarsely. "Mr. Monk's and me going to have a fight." The audience had decided how to take the situation. It rocked with laughter. The youths at the back clapped and stamped. The vicar, who was deeply attached to his sense of dignity, retired hastily. "Now," said William, who was slightly put out by the contretemps, "we have King Charles discovering America. I mean the other way around. Ladies and gentlemen, if you'll kindly notice—" The vicar and Professor Smith were interrupting him again. William turned upon them sternly, no longer trying to save the situation. "We'd all be glad," he said indignantly, "if you'd kindly keep coming up here and interrupting. This is a birthday party, and all these people have come special to see the waxwork, and you keep coming spoiling things. If you want to watch, we'd be glad, and if you go down to where the others is watching, instead of coming up here interrupting." The vicar was speechless with fury. Professor Smith was staring at William's strange attire with bewildered horror. "But I've come here," he began. "You've come here to a birthday party," said William sternly, "if you've been invited. And if you've not been invited, we'd be kindly glad if you'd kindly go home instead of staying here and interrupting. Ladies and gentlemen, will you kindly notice—" Mrs. Brown had decided to relieve the tension by having hysterics, and the spell that bound the members of the committee of the New Era Society was broken suddenly. They surged upon the platform and surrounded William, explaining, expostulating, scolding. "But she said to come here," protested William. "It's her birthday party, and these is her friends. It's a party, and you've all gone and spoiled it, interrupting." He was finally convinced of the absence of Miss Flowerdew and of the mistake, but he was still pained and aggrieved. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said to his audience with great dignity, "this waxwork show that you've seen the beginning of is going on in the old barn across the field." He had a sudden inspiration. "The other part's jolly good, better than the bit what we've seen, and is free and open to all on payment of 1/2 penny." Then, with great dignity, he led his troop across the field to the barn where Miss Flowerdew sat in solitary patience. The parish room settled down with an audible gasp and sigh. Mrs. Brown, seeing that all was over, came out of her hysterics. General Moult ceased to shout and settled down to a fierce and sustained muttering. The committee of the New Era Society came down from the platform to their places. The vicar, pale and tense, took the chair. Professor Smith smoothed back his hair, took a deep draught of water, and began. "Ladies and gentlemen, the earliest mention of Egypt in the Bible is under the name of Mizraim, which word probably is a plural form, testifying to the fact that Lower and Upper Egypt were regarded as distinct. The chief objects of cultivation in Egypt are millet, wheat, barley, dirra, maize, peas, beans, lentils, clover, rice, sugar, etc. The philologist D.I. Taylor is of opinion that the Egyptian alphabet, although incomplete, is one of the oldest known. Even at the time of the 11th and 12th dynasties, the hieroglyphic writing was a venerable system of vast antiquity." The hall was very dimly lighted, but Professor Smith began to have a vague suspicion that his audience was mysteriously thinning. It was. Shadowy forms were creeping from the room and making their way in a furtive procession across the field to the old barn. End of Chapter 2. Chapter 3 of William the Conqueror by Richmal Crompton. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 3 The Leopard Hunter. Mr. Faulkner had been staying at the Browns' house for a very long time. He had written to Mr. Brown to remind him of the fact that they had been at school together, and to ask if he might pay him a short visit. Mr. Faulkner was like that. Also, his idea of a short visit was not Mr. Brown's. Not that Mr. Faulkner needed much entertaining. He entertained himself. He talked. William had never met anyone who talked quite as much as his father's guest. Mr. Faulkner talked perpetually, and the subject of all his conversation was Mr. Faulkner. Mr. Faulkner was a never-ending source of interest to Mr. Faulkner. He talked about his exalted social position, his many and varied talents, his marvelous exploits, his ingenuity, his aristocratic friends. "Oh, yes, the Duke and I are the greatest of pals, always have been, the way the man pesters me to go and stay with him. But all my friends are the same. There's the Honourable Percy Wakefield. You've heard of him, of course. I ran into him quite last week. He simply wouldn't take no. I managed to put him off at last. Quite a nuisance, these people. Simply won't let one alone." Politeness prevented Mr. Brown from remarking that he did not grudge Mr. Faulkner to the Duke or to the Honourable Percy. Instead, Mr. Brown sat, silent and oppressed, trying to read the evening paper, which lay carelessly on the arm of his chair, and to look as if he weren't doing so. And Mr. Faulkner talked on. Mr. Faulkner was small and rather stout, with a round face, a small blighted moustache, a glassy stare, and a very squeaky voice. During term time, Mr. Faulkner did not trouble William much. William merely watched him curiously in his brief respites from school. William practised diligently and acquired a very good imitation of Mr. Faulkner's squeaky voice and glassy stare. He practised them alone every evening in his room. At meals he rather welcomed the presence of Mr. Faulkner than otherwise. Mr. Faulkner's accounts of his varied exploits, of dauntless bravery and dazzling cleverness, seemed to induce in William's family a certain apathy of hopelessness, which William thought a very proper attitude on the part of a family. No one told him to go and wash his hands and brush his hair again. No one made sarcastic remarks about his table manners. They simply had not the spirit. In fact, such is the humanizing effect of a common misfortune, they almost felt drawn to him. They had thought that no family could be afflicted with an affliction worse than William. They had discovered their mistake. They had discovered Mr. Faulkner. Then came the end of the term. The end of the term was a time of mixed feelings for William. On the one hand, there was the glorious prospect of the holidays. On the other hand, there was his report. William's best friends could not assert that he was intellectual or industrious. He was a daring and capable leader. He was, at different times and in different moods, robber, chief, pirate, Red Indian, explorer, castaway, desperado. But he was not at any time or in any mood a student. William's attitude towards the question was one of humility and self-effacement. He'd let other chaps win the prizes and things. He'd do without them. There were enough swats in the world without him. So there was a certain monotony about William's reports. Masters who had a delicate shrinkage from the crude and brutal truth wrote fair. Those who had the courage of their convictions wrote poor. The mathematical master, who was very literal, wrote uniformly bad. The horror and disgust of William's father at these statements was generally as simulated as William's penitence. They knew their respective roles and played them, but they had gone through the scene too many times to be able to put much spirit into the parts. But this time Mr. Faulkner was there. Before Mr. Brown could begin his set speech, expressive of horror and disgust, he took the paper from him and began to comment on it squeakily. "By Jove, very different from the things I used to get. Excellent, and all that sort of thing all over them. Some of them simply couldn't say enough. Remarkable talent, and very industrious and splendid work, and all that sort of thing. I remember the headmaster saying to my father one speech day, 'Brilliant boy of yours that.' Very keen-sighted man he was, too. Never made a mistake. I believe I was a great favorite at school. I've no doubt I'm still remembered there." "No, neither have I," said Mr. Brown. "Yes," bleated Mr. Faulkner. "It's extraordinary how someone at all above the average makes himself felt through life. So often I find that people who've only met me once remember me when I've quite forgotten them." Again Mr. Brown had no doubt of it. "Now, this boy of yours," went on Mr. Faulkner, "quite a good fellow, no doubt, well-meaning and all that, but," he tapped his hand upon the damning report, "if anything, below the average in intellect. I hope I don't annoy you by saying that." Mr. Brown hastened to assure him that he didn't. We can't all be above average, of course, but a boy like this wants a little friendly advice, that's all. I've no doubt that I shall be able to help him a good deal during the holiday. I always get on well with children. I could tell you most interesting stories about young friends of mine, a marked difference in them from the minute they know me." Again, Mr. Brown didn't doubt it. "I'm sure that if I stayed here through the next term, you'd find a very different report at the end of it." Mr. Brown thought that on the whole he'd prefer the same report, and the absence of Mr. Faulkner, but with great exercise of self-control he remained silent. "Very different indeed," went on Mr. Faulkner. "I wish I'd got some of my old school reports to show you. Really remarkable. I remember my form master saying when I left that the school would be a very different place without me." For the fourth time Mr. Brown remarked that he'd no doubt of it. During this interview, William sat with his most inscrutable expression and stared at the guest unblinkingly. The next day was the first day of the holidays. William wandered out into the garden after breakfast, and to his horror saw that the guest was accompanying him. "Now, my boy," squeaked Mr. Faulkner, "tell me about how many names of flowers you know." William cleared his throat sternly and threateningly, and went on as though he had neither seen nor heard Mr. Faulkner. "None," bleated his companion. "Come, tut-tut, that's sad for a boy your age. Where are you going? Out into the road? Oh, very well, I'm at your service. I can join in all your little activities, you know. What do you like to do on the holidays? Stamp collecting, I've no doubt. Most instructive. And a little school work every day so as not to forget all you learned last term. And a nice quiet walk sometimes for exercise. That's what you like, I've no doubt. That's what I liked when I was a boy. What were we talking about? Flowers. Now, here in this hedge you will see the arum or cuckoo pint. Notice the large hood, which is botanically termed a spathe. Notice also the spadix and the stamens." At the end of the road stood Ginger, Douglas, and Henry. Their faces dropped as they saw William's companion. "Ah," he said, "these your friends, Willie? They're going to join us for the morning? Very well, little boys, come along with us quietly. And what are we all going to do this morning, I propose a nice little walk along the road, and you can all listen to what I'm telling Willie about the arum or cuckoo pint. Notice, as I said, the spathe and the spadix and the stamens. Don't drag your toes in the dust, little boy. Think of your kind father who pays for them. And don't whisper to each other when I'm talking. It's not polite. I like my little friends to be polite. Now, would you like me to tell you about the habits of the busy little ant?" The outlaws were nonplussed. They had meant to go to the old barn where they generally played, but they felt they could not go with this. It would spoil the old barn for them forever, and they couldn't escape it. Mr. Faulkner's harsh, squeaky voice had a sort of hypnotizing effect. It seemed to fill the whole world. It paralyzed all their faculties. Once, in the middle of the discourse on the busy little ant, they caught each other's eyes. Into their dejected faces came a gleam of hope, and they set off running. But their self-appointed friend ran too. Despite his stoutness, he could run. "A little run," he gasped. "Oh, yes, certainly. Nothing like exercise. Nothing like exercise. That will do now, I think, though." And so utterly were their spirits broken that they let that do. They slowed down. "Rest here, I think. Now I'll give you a little practice in mental arithmetic. Let us see who can get the right answer." It was a nightmare of a morning for the outlaws. They could not shake him off. They could not shut out the terrible sound of his voice. And there was his glassy eye. The ancient mariner was nothing to him. He gave them a little lecture on history, and another on geography, and another on astronomy. He spoke to them at great length on patriotism and manliness and industry and the British Empire. "Well," he said brightly, when he had led them back to the Browns' house at lunchtime, "I'm afraid I can't come out with you this afternoon, but tomorrow morning Willie and I will be with you early." The outlaws stared at each other blankly for a minute. Then Douglas, Ginger, and Henry turned on William. "Well," they said sternly, "you've given us a nice morning." "Nothing to do with me," said William. "I didn't make him. I didn't want him. You'd be sorry for me. You've only had him a morning. He's staying with us." "How long's he staying?" "We don't know," said William gloomily. "Well, we'll wait for you tomorrow morning, but if we see him coming with you, we'll just run off alone." "You're cowards," said William bitterly. "Just cowards. That's what you are, cowards." They parted moodily. William walked slowly up the drive, oppressed by the thought of tomorrow morning spent in the sole company of Mr. Faulkner. In the morning room Mr. Faulkner was talking to Mr. Brown. "No, I never judge the time I spend with children. They always enjoy it so tremendously. You should have seen them hang on to my words this morning. I expect they'll remember it all their lives. I shouldn't wonder if it proved the turning point of their lives in a way. I opened up fresh fields of interest for them on all sides. I showed them how fascinating the pursuit of knowledge can be. I stimulated them. There was a distinct difference in their expressions even at the end of the morning. More soulful, somehow. I always had that effect on children." The outlaws spent the afternoon together, but it was not a happy one. The shadow of Mr. Faulkner lay heavy over it. In William's mind was a nightmare vision of morning after morning spent alone with Mr. Faulkner. In the minds of Ginger, Douglas, and Henry was a nightmare vision of morning after morning spent without William's inspiriting leadership and company. When William returned home, Mr. Faulkner was still talking to his father. He was talking now about a mounted leopard skin which lay across the back of the sofa. "Where was it shot?" he said. "In Africa by my brother," said Mr. Brown shortly. "What easy things to shoot leopards," bleated Mr. Faulkner. "Ridiculously easy, in fact." "You shot many?" said Mr. Brown. "Oh, yes, I've never actually counted how many. In Africa, you know. Fact is, leopards know a good shot when they see him. Now, no leopard would dream of attacking me. I simply raise my gun, the thing turns to flee, and I get him on the run. Never failed. Don't know what fear is. Simply don't know the meaning of the word. Never have, and they know it. Turn and run from me at once. Always, invariably. Big game shooting is like knocking down skittle to me." It was late that evening when William came into the room and said excitedly, "The leopards escaped from the circus at Offord. Ginger just heard down at the village. They're out trying to find him and shoot him. He's a wild leopard." Mr. Brown turned to his guest. "An opportunity for you, Faulkner," he said. Mr. Faulkner turned rather pale. He laughed nervously. Mr. Brown looked almost as if he were enjoying himself. "You simply look at him, you know," he said, "and shoot him as he turns to flee." Laughed Mr. Faulkner again, mirthlessly. "They know a good shot when they see one, you know," went on Mr. Brown, warming to his subject. "No leopard would dream of attacking you, you know." "I haven't got a gun," said Mr. Faulkner with a ghastly grin. "Oh, I've got one," said Mr. Brown. "Loaded, too. I'll get it for you." Mr. Faulkner's jaw dropped open loosely. "I wouldn't dream of putting you to all that trouble," he sputtered. "Don't trouble, pray don't trouble." "Oh, no trouble at all," said Mr. Brown, with beaming politeness as he went from the room. Mr. Faulkner sat down and mopped his brow, smiling inanely. The hope that his host would not be able to find the gun shone like a beacon from his face. William sat in a corner of the room and watched him. Mr. Brown returned with the gun. "Here it is," he said, "quite ship-shape. Now, don't let me detain you, my dear fellow. I'm sure a sportsman like you must be longing to join the fray." Mr. Faulkner took the gun gingerly. A pallid green had replaced the usual roseate hue of his round face. But suppose he comes here," he said, with a sudden gleam of hope. "Hadn't I better stay and protect you?" "Not at all, not at all," said Mr. Brown heartily. "We wouldn't spoil your sport for anything. We'd much prefer to think of you out there shooting it as it turns to flee from you. Why, you know, you've shot more than you can count." He pushed the reluctant sportsman to the front door. "Goodbye, old chap. Good luck." Then he returned to the dining room. The slow and cautious footsteps of the big game hunter could be heard treading gingerly on the gravel outside, stopping every now and then to listen. William had mysteriously disappeared. "Well, I'm going to bed," said Mr. Brown. "I've stood him every night for 3 months, and tonight I'm going to have a holiday. I don't care whether the leopard eats him or he eats the leopard. I'm going to bed." "And what shall I do? Read?" said Mrs. Brown. "Come to bed, too, if you've got any sense. You can leave the front door unlocked. He'll come back soon enough, you bet." Meanwhile, the courageous hunter was creeping cautiously down the garden path. His idea was to creep round the garden several times, then return to the house with an account of his long and fearless but unsuccessful search for the leopard. But there was a cold sweat of fear upon his brow. Suppose the creature happened to be in the garden? Could he get back in time? He kept one determined eye upon the front door as he prowled. He held the gun very cautiously. He hoped the beastly thing wouldn't go off. Nasty, dangerous things, guns. As he crept cautiously about, he was composing his account of his adventure. "I should think I'd traverse the whole village trying to come upon the creature without warning before it could have time to escape. It's a most bitter disappointment to a sportsman like me to miss such an opportunity. The brute must have felt my coming and slunk off." Suddenly he was startled by a sound in the bushes behind him. The sound was between him and the house. With a scream of terror, he dashed away down to the end of the little path. At the end of the path was a summer house, and onto this the intrepid game hunter, who knew not the meaning of the word fear, clambered, panting and moaning, and displaying in his ascent singular determination and lack of grace. He clung on with his hands while his legs dangled in the air. He tried to hoist himself up. His legs waved wildly in the air. The little sound in the bushes was repeated. With a quivering little scream, the leopard hunter hurled himself onto the roof of the summer house. He sat down and began to rub his bruises. He had barked his shins. He had aroused echoes in his funny bones. He thought he had sprained both ankles, but he wasn't quite sure. He had certainly got the skin off his knees. He examined them tenderly. He was rather surprised to find that he still had the gun. He had thrown it up to the roof before he began his climbing exploit. He gazed down through the darkness into the bushes. "Go away, you brute!" he said sternly. "Shoo, shoo, shoo!" It didn't shoo. On the contrary, there came the sound of some stealthy creature creeping through the bushes. Twigs cracked. He could see the bushes move as the thing approached. "I told you to go away!" he squeaked hysterically from his roof. "Go away! Go away!" He flung out his arms in a gesture of dismissal. "Shh!" The thing came on. Perhaps it might be a cat or a dog, thought the hunter, and at the thought hope sprang afresh in his heart. "Puss, puss, puss!" he said through the darkness. There was no response. "Good dog!" he panted. "Rats, cats, fetch him out. Come for walk. Oh, truss, what's the bone? Good dog, good dog!" There was no response. Something fairly large, not a cat or a dog, banged against the summer house. Could it be a donkey or a sheep or a cow? Oh, couldn't it be a donkey or a sheep or a cow? He peered anxiously over the edge of the roof. "Ee-haw!" he greeted the unknown with eager propitiation in his voice. "Baa! Moo!" For answer there came through the darkness a low growl. It certainly wasn't a cat or a dog or a donkey or a cow. It was certainly a leopard. He'd never heard a leopard's voice before. For the matter of that, he had never seen a leopard before. But there was no doubt that this was a leopard's voice. Through the darkness came the sound of teeth chattering. They weren't the leopard's. Then the man on the summer house began to think out plans. He leant over the edge and gave a ferocious growl. The growl that answered his through the darkness made his blood curdle. "Oh!" he moaned. "Oh, my holy aunt!" The thing was prowling round and round the summer house. Mr. Faulkner saw himself suddenly as he might be in the morning light, a mass of whitened bones. Or did the creature eat you, bones and all? The tears rolled down his fat cheeks at the thought. Soon he realized that all was silent. Perhaps the creature had gone away again. He waited for what seemed hours. Still silence. Surely now he might creep back to the house. He lowered one foot cautiously from the roof. Then he gave a yell. Something had grabbed it in the darkness. He wrenched it free and cowered on his roof, rubbing it. "Oh!" he moaned. "Oh, my holy aunt!" The agony of that night will live forever in the memory of the leopard hunter. Most terrible was the moment when the leopard tried to clamber up the summer house. Sometimes there was silence for so long that the weary watchman almost fell asleep. He had given up all thoughts of escape. But no sooner did he doze than the creature below would arouse him by growls and bumps or threatening sniffs. Mr. Faulkner was cold and miserable. Every bone in his body ached, and the creature would not let him rest. It growled on one side of the roof and drove him to the other. Then it growled on the other side and drove him back again. Many times did his moaning "Oh!" fall upon the midnight air. Mr. Faulkner had had no idea before that a night was so long. It was an eternity. He dared not strike a match to look at his watch in case the creature should spring, but he was sure that it was longer than any other night had ever been. It was a phenomenon. It was like a month of nights. But at last the first faint rays of dawn appeared. They grew less faint. Mr. Faulkner's pallid, anxious, disheveled countenance peered over the edge of his roof. He could hear no sound. Then he saw it unmistakably, a leopard's head among the bushes. With a sudden spasm of desperate courage he took his gun, shut his eyes, and fired. And he hit it. By a miracle he hit it. He saw it roll over among the bushes. Then all was still. He waited. After about half an hour he descended cautiously from his perch. He dared not approach his bag. He had heard terrible stories of the ferocity of wild animals in their death throes. He tiptoed slowly and furtively to the front door. They all met at breakfast. Both Mr. Faulkner and William looked as though they had spent sleepless nights. But Mr. Faulkner, though pale, was his usual debonair self. "Any luck?" said Mr. Brown. "Oh, yes," said Mr. Faulkner carelessly. I caught the brute. Found him in your garden, too. Came upon him face to face in the path. He gathered to spring. I just stood and looked at him, simply looked. He turned and began to slink away, and then I raised my rifle and fired, just as I told you. Perfectly simple with a sportsman of my caliber. Lucky it was I who met him. You'll find the body somewhere in the garden." They all trooped out. It might have been noticed that the leopard hunter kept modestly in the rear. "Just over there by those bushes, I believe," he said airily. Mr. Brown strode into the bushes and pulled out the leopard skin rug. There was certainly a new bullet hole in its head. The gallant sportsman began to splutter inarticulately. "What?" began Mr. Brown. William, wearing his most sphinx-like expression, stepped forward. "Well, I thought it smelled a bit kind of stuffy, and so I brought it out here last night to be in the fresh air a bit, like what it was in spring cleaning and that." The gallant sportsman was still gibbering. But I heard William turned his inscrutable countenance to him. "I'm afraid perhaps it was me you heard," he said. "I can't sleep. So I got up and just played about the garden a bit, just to make me sleep better. Fresh air and exercise like what they say makes you sleep. I was playing mostly round the summer house." Mr. Faulkner looked sharply at William, but William's face was a blank. "Excuse me a minute," murmured Mr. Faulkner, and quietly went indoors. The gardener came past. "Did you hear anything about a leopard escaping from the circus at Offord?" asked Mr. Brown to him. "There ain't no circus at Offord," replied the gardener gloomily as he passed on. "There ain't no circus anywhere around here." Mr. Brown turned to William. "Who told you about this leopard?" he said sternly. "Ginger," said William unblinkingly. "Who told him?" "He's not quite sure," said William, in the voice of one repeating a lesson. "He's forgot. He thinks perhaps it was someone in the village." "Well, you'd better go and tell Mr. Faulkner that you're sorry you made a mistake." William went slowly indoors, but Mr. Faulkner had gone. He had found a train just going up to town, and he had accompanied it. He had left a note to say that he had been called suddenly to town, and would they kindly send his things after him. "Dear me, what a pity!" said Mr. Brown, looking as if he had suddenly discovered the elixir of perpetual youth. "You can't apologize after all, William. Well, never mind." He slipped a half-crown into William's hand and went off, his face wreathed in smiles. It was 2 hours later. The outlaws sat on the floor in their beloved old barn. In the midst of them were large paper bags of bull's eyes, licorice lumps, barley sugar, and chocolate cigars. The half-crown had been well expended. The outlaws were munching happily. "What sort of a noise did you make?" Ginger was saying as he puffed out imaginary smoke from his chocolate cigar. William emitted a blood-curdling growl. And what did he say? "Oh, oh, oh, my holy aunt!" It was an excellent imitation of the leopard hunter's quavering moan. And what did he do? William rose. "You come round to our summer house and I'll show you. Ginger be me growling and I be him carrying on. Come along." They collected the bags and strode off happily with their leader. End of chapter 3. Chapter 4 of William the Conqueror by Richmal Crompton. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 4. William Leads a Better Life. If you go far enough back, it was Mr. Strong, William's form master, who was responsible for the whole thing. Mr. Strong set, for homework, more French than it was convenient for William to learn. It happened that someone had presented William with an electric motor, and the things one can do with an electric motor are endless. Who would waste the precious hours of a summer evening over French verbs with an electric motor simply crying out to be experimented on? Certainly not William. It wasn't as if there was any sense in the French verbs. They had been deliberately invented by someone with a grudge against the race of boys. Someone, probably, who'd slipped on a concealed slide, or got in the way of a snowball, or foolishly come within the danger zone of a catapult. Anyway, whoever it was had devised a mean form of revenge by inventing French verbs, and somehow or other persuading schoolmasters to adopt them as one of their choicest tortures. "Well, I never will want to use 'em," said William to his mother, when she brought forward the time-honored argument. "I don't want to talk to any French folks, and if they want to talk to me, they can learn English. English is easy to talk. It's silly having other language. I don't see why all the other countries shouldn't learn English instead of us learning other languages with no sense in 'em. English is sense." This speech convinced him yet more firmly of the foolishness of wasting his precious hours of leisure on such futile study, so he devoted all his time and energy to the electric motor. There was some sense in the electric motor. William spent a very happy evening. In the morning, however, things somehow seemed different. He lay in bed and considered the matter. There was no doubt that Mr. Strong could make himself extremely disagreeable over French verbs. William remembered that he had threatened to make himself more disagreeable than usual if William did not know them next time. This was next time, and William did not know them. William had not even attempted to learn them. The threats of Mr. Strong had seemed feeble, purposeless, contemptible things last night, when the electric motor threw its glamour over the whole world. This morning they didn't. They seemed suddenly much more real than the electric motor. But surely it was possible to circumvent them. William was not the boy to give in weakly to any fate. He heard his mother's door opening, and assuming an expression of intense suffering, called weakly, "Mother!" Mrs. Brown entered the room fully dressed. "Aren't you up yet, William?" she said. "Be quick, or you'll be late for school." William intensified yet further his expression of suffering. "I don't think I feel quite well enough to go to school this morning, mother dear," he said faintly. Mrs. Brown looked distressed. He had employed the ruse countless times before, but it never failed of its effect upon Mrs. Brown. The only drawback was that Mr. Brown, who was still about the house, was of a less trustful and compassionate nature. Mrs. Brown smoothed his pillow. "Poor little boy," she said tenderly. "Where's the pain?" "All over," said William, playing for safety. "Dear, dear," said Mrs. Brown, much perturbed, as she left the room. "I'll just go and fetch the thermometer." William disliked the thermometer. It was a soulless, unsympathetic thing. Sometimes, of course, a hot water bottle, judiciously placed, would enlist its help, but that was not always easy to arrange. To William's dismay, his father entered the room with the thermometer. "Well, William," he said cheerfully, "I hear you're too ill to go to school. That's a great pity, isn't it? I'm sure it's a great grief to you." William turned up his eyes. "Yes, father," he said dutifully and suspiciously. "Now, where exactly is the pain, and what sort of pain is it?" William knew from experience that descriptions of non-existent pains are full of pitfalls. By a master stroke he avoided them. "It hurts me to talk," he said. "What sort of pain does it hurt you with?" said his father brutally. William made some inarticulate noises, then closed his eyes with a moan of agony. "I'll just step round and fetch the doctor," said Mr. Brown, still quite cheerful. The doctor lived next door. William considered this a great mistake. He disliked the close proximity of doctors. They were equally annoying in real and imaginary diseases. William made little brave, reassuring noises to inform his father that he'd rather the doctor wasn't troubled, and it was all right, and please no one was to bother about him, and he'd just stay in bed and probably be all right by the afternoon. But his father had already gone. William lay in bed and considered his position. Well, he was going to stick to it anyway. He'd just make noises to the doctor, and they couldn't say he hadn't got a pain where he said he had if they didn't know where he said he had one. His mother came in and took his temperature. Fate was against him. There was no hot water bottle handy, but he squeezed it as hard as he could in a vague hope that that would have some effect on it. "It's normal, dear," said his mother, relieved. "I'm so glad." He made a sinister noise to imply that the malady was too deep-seated to be shown by an ordinary thermometer. He could hear the doctor and his father coming up the stairs. They were laughing and talking. William, forgetting the imaginary nature of his complaint, felt a wave of indignation and self-pity. The doctor came in breezily. "Well, young man," he said, "what's the trouble?" William made his noise. By much practice he was becoming an expert at the noise. It implied an intense desire to explain his symptoms, thwarted by physical incapability, and it thrilled with suffering bravely endured. "Can't speak, is that it?" said the doctor. "Yes, that's it," said William, forgetting his role for the moment. "Well, open your mouth and let's have a look at your throat," said the doctor. William opened his mouth and revealed his throat. The doctor inspected the recesses of that healthy and powerful organ. "I see," he said at last. "Yes, very bad, but I can operate here and now, fortunately. I'm afraid I can't give an anesthetic in this case, and I'm afraid it will be rather painful, but I'm sure he's a brave boy." William went pale and looked around desperately. French verbs were preferable to this. "I'll wait just 3 minutes," said the doctor kindly. "Occasionally, in cases like this, the patient recovers his voice quite suddenly." He took out his watch. William's father was watching the scene with an air of quiet enjoyment that William found maddening. "I'll give him just 3 minutes," went on the doctor, "and if the patient hasn't recovered the power of speech by then, I'll operate." The patient decided hastily to recover the power of speech. "I can speak now," he said, with an air of surprise. "Isn't it funny? I can talk quite ordinary now. It came on quite sudden." "No pain anywhere?" said the doctor. "No," said the patient quickly. The patient's father stepped forward. "Oh, then you'd better get up quickly as you can," he said. "You'll be late for school, but doubtless they'll know how to deal with that." They did know how to deal with that. They knew, too, how to deal with William's complete ignorance on the subject of French verbs. Excuses, and William had many, some of them richly ingenious, were of no avail. He went home to lunch embittered and disillusioned with life. "You'd think knowing how to work a motor engine 'd be more useful than saying French verbs," he said. "S'pose I turned out an engineer. Well, what use'd French verbs be to me, and I'd have to know how to work a motor engine. And I was so ill this morning that the doctor wanted to do an operate on me. But I said I can't miss school and get all behind the others, and I came awful ill, and all they did was to carry on something terrible, 'cause I was just a minute or two late and just at time to do those old French verbs that aren't no use to anyone." Ginger, Henry, and Douglas sympathized with him for some time, then began to discuss history lesson. The history master, feeling for the moment as bored with Edward VI as were most of his class, had given them a graphic account of the life of St. Francis of Assisi. He had spent the Easter holidays at Assisi. William, who had been engaged in executing creditable caricatures of Mr. Strong and the doctor, had paid little attention, but Ginger remembered it all. It had been such a welcome change from William the Conqueror. William began to follow the discussion. "Yes, but why'd he do it?" he said. "Well, he just got kind of fed up with things, and he just had vision of things, and he took some things of his father's to sell to get money to start it." "Crumbs!" interpolated William. "Wasn't his father mad?" "Yes, but that didn't matter. He was a saint, was St. Francis, so he could sell his father's things if he liked, and he and his friends took the money and got funny long sort of clothes and went on lived away in a little house by themselves, and he used to preach to animals and to people and call everything brother and sister, and they cooked all their own stuff to eat, and—" "Jolly fine it sounds," said William enviously. "And did their people let 'em?" "They couldn't stop 'em," said Ginger. "And Francis, he was the head one, and the others all called themselves Franciscans, and they built churches and things." They had reached the gate of William's house now, and William turned in slowly. "Good-bye till this afternoon," called the others cheerfully. Lunch increased still further William's grievances. No one inquired after his health, though he tried to look pale and ill, and refused a second helping of rice pudding with a meaning, "No, thank you, not today. I would if I felt all right, thank you very much." Even that elicited no anxious inquiries. No one, thought William, as he finished up the rice pudding in secret in the larder afterwards, no one else in the world surely had such a callous family. It would just serve them right to lose him altogether. It would just serve them right if he went off like St. Francis and never come back. He met Henry and Ginger and Douglas again, as usual, on the way to school. "Beastly old arithmetic," said Henry despondently. "Yes, and then beastly old geography," sighed Douglas. "Well," said William, "let's not go. I've been thinking a lot about that saint man. I'd a lot sooner be a saint and build things and cook things and preach to things than keep going to school and learning the same old things day after day and day after day, and things like French verbs without any sense in them. I'd much rather be a saint, wouldn't you?" The other outlaws looked doubtful, as though attracted by the idea. "They won't let us," said Henry. "They can't stop us being saints," said William piously, "and doing good and preaching, and if we have visions, and I feel as if I could have visions quite easy." The outlaws had slackened their pace. "What did we have to do first?" said Ginger. "Sell some of our father's things to get money," said William firmly. "It's all right," he went on, anticipating possible objections. "He did, so I suppose anyone can if they're setting out to be saints. Of course, it would be different if we just stealing, but being saints makes it different. Stands to reason saints can't steal." "Well, what do we do then?" said Douglas. "Then we find a place and get the right sort of clothes to wear." "Seems sort of a waste of money," said Henry sternly, "spending it on clothes. What sort of clothes were they?" "Oh, he showed us a picture," said Ginger, "don't you remember? Sort of long things going right down to his feet." "Dressing gowns'll do," said Douglas excitedly. "No, you're thinking of detectives," said Henry firmly. "Detectives wear dressing gowns." "No," said William judicially. "I don't see why dressing gowns shouldn't do. Then we can save the money and spend it on things to eat. Where'll we live? We ought to build a place, but till we've built it, we can live in the old barn. Where'll we get the animals to preach to? Well, there's a farm just across the way from the barn, you know. We can start on Jumbo, and then go to the farm once when we've had some practice. And what'll we be called? We can't be the Outlaws, now we're saints, I suppose. What were they called? Franciscans, after Francis. He was the head one. Well, if there's going to be any head one, said William in a tone that precluded any argument on the subject, if there's going to be any head one, I'm going to be him. None of them denied to William the position of leader. It was his by right. He had always led, and he was a leader they were proud to follow. Well, they just put Cans on to the end of his name, said Henry. Francis Cans. So we'll be William Cans. Sounds kind of funny, said Ginger dubiously. I think it sounds jolly fine, said William proudly. I vote we start tomorrow, 'cause it's rather late to start today. And anyway, it's Saturday tomorrow, so we can get well started for Monday, 'cause they're sure to make a fuss about our not turning up at school on Monday. You all come to the old barn directly after breakfast tomorrow, and bring your dressing gowns and something of your father's to sell. The first meeting of the William Cans was held directly after breakfast the next morning. They had all left notes dictated by William on their bedroom mantelpieces, announcing that they were now saints and had left home forever. They deposited their dressing gowns on the floor of the old barn, and then inspected the possessions that they had looted from their unsuspecting fathers. William had appropriated a pair of slippers, not because he thought their absence would be undetected, far from it, or because he thought they would realize the vast wealth, again far from it, but it happened that they were kept in the fender box of the morning room, and William had found himself alone there for a few minutes that morning, and slippers can be concealed quite easily beneath one's coat. He could have more easily appropriated something of his mother's, but William liked to do things properly. St. Francis had sold something of his father's, so St. William would do the same. Douglas took from his pocket an inkstand, purloined from his father's desk. Ginger had 2 ties, and Henry a pair of gloves. They looked at their spoils with proud satisfaction. We ought to get a good deal of money for these, said William. How much did he get, do you know? No, he never said Ginger. We'd better not put on our saint robes yet, not till we've been down to the village to sell the things. Then we'll pull 'em on and start preaching and things. Then we orter wear round hoop sort of things on our heads, said Henry. They do in pictures. What do you call 'em, halos? You don't get them till you're dead, said Ginger, with an air of wisdom. Well, I don't see what good they are to anyone dead, said Henry, rather aggrieved. No, we got to do things right, said William sternly. If the real saints waited till they was dead, we will too. Anyway, let's go and sell the things first. And remember, from now, we've got to call each other saint, and call everything else brother or sister. Everything? Yes, he did. The other man did. Yes, but William, you gotta call me Saint William now, Ginger. All right, you call me Saint Ginger. All right, I'm going to. Saint Ginger. Saint William. All right. Well, where are you going to sell the slippers? Brother slippers, corrected William. Well, I'm going to sell brother slippers at Mr. Marsh's if he'll buy 'em. And I'll take brother ties along too, said Ginger, and Henry take brother gloves, and Douglas brother inkstand. Sister inkstand, said Douglas. William, Saint William, corrected William patiently. Well, St. William said we could call things brother or sister, and my inkstand's going to be sister. Swank, said St. Ginger severely, always wanting to be different from other people. Mr. Marsh kept a second-hand shop at the end of the village. In his window reposed side by side a motley collection of battered and despised household goods. He had a less optimistic opinion of the value of brothers, slippers and ties and gloves, and sister inkstand than the saints. He refused to allow them more than sixpence each. "Mean!" exploded St. William indignantly, as soon as they had emerged from Mr. Marsh's dingy little sanctum to the village street and the light of day. "I call him simply mean. That's what I call him." "I suppose now we're saints," said St. Ginger piously, "that we got to forgive folks what wrong us like that." "I'm not going to be that sort of a saint," said William firmly. Back at the barn they donned their dressing gowns, St. Henry still grumbling at not being able to wear the little hoop on his head. "Now, what do we do first?" said St. Ginger energetically, as he fastened the belt of his dressing gown. "Well, anyway, why can't we cut little bits of our hair at the top like they have in pictures?" said St. Henry disconsolately. "That'd be better than nothing." This idea rather appealed to the saints. St. Douglas discovered a penknife and began to operate at once on St. Henry, but the latter saint's yells of agony soon brought the proceedings to a premature end. "Well, you've suggested it," said St. Douglas, rather hurt, "and I was going to do it gently as I could." "Gently?" groaned Henry, still nursing his saintly head. "You were tearing it out by the roots." "Well, come on," said St. Ginger impatiently. "Let's begin now. What did you say we were going to do first?" "Preachin' to animals is the first thing," said William, in his most businesslike manner. "I've got Brother Jumbo here. I mean St. Ginger, you hold Brother Jumbo while I preach to him, 'cause he's not used to it, and he might try to run away, and St. Henry and St. Douglas go out and preach to birds. The St. Francis man did a lot of preachin' to birds. They came and sat on his arms. See if you can get 'em to do that. Well, now, let's start, St. Ginger. You catch hold of Brother Jumbo." Henry and Douglas departed. Douglas' dressing gown, made by a thrifty mother with a view to Douglas' further growth, was slightly too big and tripped him over every few steps. Henry's was made of bath toweling and was rather conspicuous in design. They made their way slowly across a field and into a neighboring wood. St. Ginger encircled the reluctant Jumbo with his arms, and St. William stood up to preach. "Dearly beloved Jumbo," he began. "Brother Jumbo," corrected St. Ginger with triumph. He liked to catch the founder of the order tripping. Jumbo, under the delusion that something was expected of him, sat up and begged. "Dearly beloved Brother Jumbo," repeated William. He stopped and cleared his throat in the manner of all speakers who were not sure what to say next. Jumbo, impatient of the other saints' encircling arms, tried another trick, that of standing on his head. Standing on his head was the title given to the performance by Jumbo's owner. In reality, it consisted of rubbing the top of his head on the ground. None of his legs left the ground, but William always called it Jumbo standing on his head, and was inordinately proud of it. "Look at him," he said. "Isn't that jolly clever? And no one told him to. Just did it without anyone telling him to. I bet there's not many dogs like him. I bet he's the cleverest dog there is in England. I wouldn't mind saying he's the cleverest dog there is in the world. I thought you was preaching to him, not talking about him," said St. Ginger sternly. Ginger, who was not allowed to possess a dog, tired occasionally of hearing William sing the praises of his. "Oh, yes," said St. William with less enthusiasm. "I'll start all over again. Dearly beloved Brother Jumbo. I say, what did that St. Francis say to the animals?" "Dunno," said St. Ginger vaguely. "I expect he just told 'em to do good and that sort of thing." "Dearly beloved Brother Jumbo," said William again, "you must do good and stop chasing cats. Why," he said proudly, "there's not a cat in this village that doesn't run when it sees Jumbo coming. I bet he's the best dog for chasing cats anywhere round this part of England. I bet—" Jumbo, seizing this moment for escape, tore himself from St. Ginger's unwary arms and leapt up ecstatically on William. "Good old Jumbo," said the saint affectionately. "Good old boy." At this point the other two saints returned. "Well, did you find any birds?" said St. William. "There was heaps of birds," said St. Douglas in an exasperated tone of voice, "but the minute I started preaching they all flew off." They didn't seem to know how to act with saints. They didn't seem to know they got to sit on your arms and things. Made us feel mad. Anyway, we got a thrush's egg, and St. Henry, just wanted one of those. Well, said St. William rather sternly, I don't think it's the right thing for saints to do, to go preaching to birds and then taking their eggs. Their brother eggs. There were lots more, said Henry. They like you just taking one. It makes it less trouble for 'em hatching 'em out. Well, anyway, said William, let's get on with this animal business. Perhaps the tame ones will be better. Let's go across to Jenks' farm and try on them. They crept rather cautiously into the farmyard. The feud between Farmer Jenks and the outlaws was one of long standing. He would probably not realize that the Williamcans were a saintly organization whose every action was inspired by a love of mankind. He would probably imagine that they were still the old unregenerate outlaws. I'll do Brother Cows, said St. William, and St. Ginger do Brother Pigs, and St. Douglas do Brother Goats, and St. Henry do Sister Hens. They approached their various audiences. Ginger leant over the pigsty, and then he turned to William, who was already striking an attitude before his congregation of cows, and said, I say, what have I got to say to 'em? At that moment, Brother Goat, being approached too nearly by St. Douglas, butted the saint's stomach, and St. Douglas sat down suddenly and heavily. Brother Goat, evidently enjoying this form of entertainment, returned to the charge. St. Douglas fled to the accompaniment of an uproarious farmyard commotion. Farmer Jenks appeared, and seeing his old enemies, the outlaws, actually within his precincts, he uttered a yell of fury and darted down upon them. The saints fled swiftly, St. Douglas holding up his too-flowing robe as he went. Brother Goat had given St. Douglas a good start, and he reached the barn first. Well, said St. William, panting, I've finished with preaching to animals. They must have changed a good deal since his time. That's all I can say. Well, what do we do now? Said St. Ginger. I should almost think it's time for dinner, said William. Must be after 2, I should think. No one knew the time. Henry possessed a watch which had been given to him by a great uncle. Though it may possibly have had some value as an antique, it had not gone for over 20 years. Henry, however, always wore it, and generally remembered to move its hands to a correct position whenever he passed a clock. This took a great deal of time and trouble, but Henry was proud of his watch, and liked it to be as nearly right as was possible. He consulted it now. He had put it right by his family's hall clock as he came out after breakfast, so its fingers stood at 9:30. He returned it to his pocket hastily before the others could see the position of the fingers. Yes, he said, with an air of an oracle, it's about dinner time. Though they all knew that Henry's watch had never gone, yet it had a certain prestige. Well, we've got to buy our dinner, said William. Suppose 2 of us goes down to the village and buys it now with the 2 shillings we got for selling our father's things. We've got to buy all our meals now like what they did. Well, how do we get the money when we're finished this? We can't go on selling our father's things. They get so mad. We beg from folks after that, said St. Ginger, who was the only one who had paid much attention to the story of the life of St. Francis. Well, I bet they won't give us much if I know 'em, said William bitterly. I bet both folks and animals must been nicer in those times. It was decided that Douglas and Henry should go down to the village to purchase provisions for the meal. It was decided also that they should go in their dressing gowns. They always did, said Ginger firmly, and folks may well get used to us going about like that. Oh, yes, said Douglas bitterly. So easy to talk like that when you're not going down to the shop. Mr. Moss, the proprietor of the village sweet shop, held his sides with laughter when he saw them. Well, I never, he said. Well, I never. What boys you are for a joke, to be sure. It's not a joke, said Henry. We're Williamkins. Douglas had caught sight of the clock on the desk behind the counter. I say, he said, it's only 11 o'clock. Henry took out his watch. "Oh, yes," he said, as if he had made a mistake when he looked at it before. For their midday meal the two saints purchased a large bag of chocolate creams, another of bull's eyes, and, to form the more solid part of the meal, 4 cream buns. Ginger and William and Jumbo were sitting comfortably in the old barn when the two emissaries returned. "We've had a nice time," exploded St. Henry. "All the boys in the place running after us and shouting at us." "You should have just stood still and preached to 'em," said the founder of the order calmly. "Preach to 'em?" repeated Henry. "They wouldn't have listened. They was shouting and throwing things and running at us. What'd you do?" "Run," said the gallant saint simply, "and Douglas has tore his robe and I've fallen in the mud in mine." "Well, they've got to last you all the rest of your life," said St. William, "so you ought to take better care of 'em," and added with more interest, "What have you got for dinner?" They displayed their purchases, and their choice was warmly and unanimously approved by the saints. "Wish we'd thought of something to drink," said Henry. But William, with a smile of pride, brought out from his pocket a bottle of dark liquid. "I thought of that," he said, holding it out with a flourish. "Have a drink of brother licorice water." Not to be outdone, Douglas took up one of the bags. "And have a sister cream bun," he said proudly. When they had eaten and drunk to repletion, they rested for a short time from their labors. William had meant to fill in the time by preaching to Jumbo, but decided instead to put Jumbo through his tricks. "I suppose they know now at home that we're gone for good," said Henry with a sigh. Ginger looked out of the little window anxiously. "Yes, I only hope to goodness they won't come and try to fetch us back," he said. But he need not have troubled. Each family thought that the missing member was having lunch with one of the others, and felt no anxiety, only a great relief. And none of the notes upon the mantelpieces had been found. "What do we do now?" said William, rousing himself at last. "They built a church," said Ginger. "Crumbs," said William, taken aback. "Well, we can't do that, can we?" "Oh, I don't know," said Ginger vaguely. "Just keep on putting stones on each other. It was quite a little church." "Well, it'd take us more'n quite a little time." "Yes, but we got to do something 'stead of going to school, and we may as well do that." "It's almost as bad as going to school," said William gloomily. "And where'd they get the stones?" "Oh, they just found 'em lying about." "Well, come on," said William, rising with a resigned air and gathering the folds of his dressing gown about him. "Let's see if we can find 'em lying about." They wandered down to the road. They still wore their dressing gowns, but they wore them with a sheepish air and went cautiously and furtively. Already their affection for their saintly garb was waning. Fortunately, the road was deserted. They looked up and down, then St. Ginger gave a yell of triumph and pointed up the road. The road was being mended, and there lay by the roadside, among other materials, a little heap of wooden bricks. Moreover, the bricks were unguarded and unattended. It was the British workman's dinner hour, and the British workman was spending it in the nearest pub. "Crumbs," said Williamkins in delight. They fell upon the wooden bricks and bore them off in triumph. Soon they had a large pile of them just outside the barn where they had resolved to build the church. Almost enough, the head of the order decided, to begin on. But as they paid their last visit for bricks, they met a little crowd of other children, who burst into loud, jeering cries. "Look at 'em, dear little girlies, wearing nice long pinnies. Oh, my! Oh, don't they look sweet? Oh, hello, little darlings!" William flung aside his saintly robe and closed with the leader. The other saints closed with the others. Quite an interesting fight ensued. The saints, smaller in number and size than the other side, most decidedly got the best of it, though not without many casualties. The other side took to its heels. St. William, without much enthusiasm, picked his saintly robe up from the mud and began to put it on. "Don't see much sense in wearing these things," he said. "You ought to have preached to 'em, not fought 'em," said Ginger severely. "Well, I bet he wouldn't preach to them if they'd started making fun of him. He'd have fought 'em all right." "No, he wouldn't," said Ginger firmly. "He didn't believe in fighting." William's respect for his prototype, already on the wane, waned still further, but he did not lightly relinquish anything he had once undertaken. "Well, anyway," he said, "let's get a move on building that church." They returned to the field and their little pile of bricks. But the British workman had also returned from his dinner hour at the nearest pub, and had discovered the disappearance of the larger part of his material. With lurid oaths he had tracked them down, and came upon the saints just as they had laboriously laid the first row of bricks for the first wall. He burst upon them with fury. They did not stay to argue. They fled. Henry cast aside his splendid robe of multicolored bath toweling into a ditch to accelerate his flight. The British workman tired first. He went back after throwing a brick at their retreating forms, and informing them lustily that he knew their fathers, and he'd go and tell them, danged if he wouldn't, and they'd find themselves in jail. Saucy little hounds! Danged if they wouldn't. The Williamsons waited till all was clear before they emerged from their hiding places and gathered together dejectedly in the barn. William and Ginger had sustained black eyes and bleeding noses as the result of the fight with the village children. Douglas had fallen during the flight from the British workman and cut his head. The British workman's parting shot had caught Henry on his ankle, and he limped painfully. Their faces had acquired an extraordinary amount of dirt. They sat down and surveyed each other. "Seems to me," said William, "it's a wearin' kind of life." It was cold. It had begun to rain. "Brother rain," remarked Ginger brightly. "Yes, and I should think it's about Sister tea time," said William dejectedly. "And what are we going to buy her with? How are we going to get money?" "I've got sixpence at home," said Henry. I've got her brother sixpence at home." But William had lost his usual optimism. "Well, that won't keep all of us for the rest of our lives, will it?" he said. "And I don't feel like starting begging after the time I've had today. I haven't had much trust in folks. St. Henry, oughter give his brother sixpence to the poor," said Ginger piously. "They used to give all their money to the poor." "Give it," said William incredulously, "and get nothing back for it?" "No, just to give it," said Ginger. William thought deeply for a minute. "Well," he said at last, voicing the opinion of the whole order, "I'm just about sick of being a saint. I'd sooner be a pirate or a Red Indian any day." The rest looked relieved. "Yes, I've had enough," said William, "and let's stop calling each other saints and brothers and sisters and wearing dressing gowns. There's no sense in it, and I'm almost dying of cold and hunger, and I'm going home." They set off homeward through the rain, cold and wet and bruised and very hungry. The saintly repast of cream buns and chocolate creams and bull's eyes, though enjoyable at the time, had proved singularly unsustaining. But their troubles were not over. As they went through the village, they stopped in front of Mr. Marsh's shop window. There in the middle were William's father's slippers, Douglas' father's inkstand, Ginger's father's tie, and Henry's father's gloves, all marked at £1. The hearts of the Williamsons stood still. Their fathers would probably not yet have returned from town. The thought of their seeing their prized possessions reposing in Mr. Marsh's window marked £1 was a horrid one. It had not seemed to matter this morning. This morning they were leaving their homes forever. It did seem to matter this evening. This evening they were returning to their homes. They entered the shop and demanded them. Mr. Marsh was adamant. In the end, Henry fetched his sixpence, William a treasured penknife, Ginger a compass, and Douglas a broken steam engine, and their paternal possessions were handed back. They went home dejectedly through the rain. The British workman might or might not fulfill his threat of calling on their parents. The saintly career which had looked so roseate in the distance had turned out, as William aptly described it, wearin'. Life was full of disillusions. William discovered with relief that his father had not yet come home. He returned the slippers, somewhat damp, to the fender box. He put his muddy dressing gown beneath the bed. He found his note unopened and unread still upon the mantelpiece. He tore it up. He tidied himself superficially. He went downstairs. "Had a nice day, dear?" said his mother. He disdained to answer the question. "There's just an hour before tea," she went on. "Hadn't you better do some of your homework, dear?" He considered. One might as well drink of tragedy the very dregs while one was about it. It would be a rotten ending to a rotten day. Besides, there was no doubt about it. Mr. Strong was going to make himself very disagreeable indeed if he didn't know those French verbs for Monday. He might as well. If he'd had any idea how rotten it was being a saint, he jolly well wouldn't have wasted a whole Saturday over it. He took down a French grammar and sat down moodily before it without troubling to put it right way up. End of chapter 4. Chapter 5 of William the Conqueror by Richmal Crompton. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 5, William and the Lost Tourist. William, Ginger, Douglas, and Henry were on their way home from school. Owing to the absence of one of the masters, they had been given an extra hour to learn their homework. William had not used it to the best advantage. He had spent the first part of it making rats out of ink-sodden blotting paper, till he was summoned to the front of the room, where his activity should be under the eye of authority. There, under compulsion, he opened his Shakespeare and idly committed to memory the lines chosen for his edification by his English master. "Friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears. I come to bury Caesar, not to praise him. The evil that men do lives after them. The good is often interred with their bones," he murmured monotonously to himself, rubbing his eyes with his ink-stained fingers till the ink gradually overspread his freckled countenance. There was nothing unusual in that. As his mother plaintively remarked, William could never touch ink without getting all over with it. She would have felt almost uneasy had William ever returned home from school without his customary coating of ink or mud. William wandered home with Ginger and Douglas and Henry, chanting blithely, "Friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears." "Who was this Shakespeare, anyway?" said William. "He was a poet," said Douglas unctuously, "and he just lived and died." "Didn't he do anything?" said William. "He wrote poetry." "That's not doing anything," said William contemptuously. "I can write poetry. I mean, didn't he fight or something?" "It says in the beginning of the book he acted," said Henry, rather vaguely. "Huh," said William, "that's nothing. I can act. I don't think much of him." "There's statues up to him in places," said Henry, still with his air of comprehensive knowledge. "Well, if that's all he did," said William with disgust, "they might just as well put statues up to me. I can write poetry and act if that's all he did." William's heroes were men of action. He was not a patron of the arts. They were passing Mrs. Maloney's cottage. Mrs. Maloney lived alone with a dog and a cat and a canary. She was very old and very cantankerous. She hated everyone, but her hatred of boys was the absorbing passion of her life. And of all boys in the world, the boys she most hated were the outlaws. It was probably that alone which kept her alive. She visibly failed in health on the days on which she had no encounter with the outlaws. On the days when she had joined battle with them, she looked less infirm. On the days when she successfully routed them, she looked almost hale and hearty. The outlaws were afraid of Mrs. Maloney and Mrs. Maloney's dog and Mrs. Maloney's cat. They firmly believed her to be a witch. It was that fear which made it a point of honor with them never to pass the cottage without some act of daring aggression. To the outlaws, danger was the very breath of life. There was a hole in the side of her garden hedge that bordered the fields by the side of the road, and on their way home the outlaws took it in turn to enter the field, crawl through the hole, and walk, or generally run, down Mrs. Maloney's garden path to her gate and out into the road. They did no harm to the garden, but the sight of the hateful creatures in her garden threw the old lady into a frenzy. Considering her age and infirmities, she could move with remarkable speed, and not infrequently one or other of the outlaws fell into her clutches. That was a thrill full of ecstasy and terror for the outlaws, a thing to dream of and talk of with bated breath and dare again. Her cat and dog were loyal lieutenants who shared her hatred of the whole race of boys. The dog had bitten Henry, and the cat had scratched Ginger only the week before. Today it was William's turn to creep through the hole. Mrs. Maloney was standing near the door. She was generally there, ready for the fray when the outlaws came home from school. Today fate was not on their side. Ginger, Henry, and Douglas were at the gate, ready to open it for William's flying figure, but on this occasion William's figure did not fly. It stuck in the hole. When it emerged, it was to face a furious Mrs. Maloney, who grabbed his ears with claw-like hands, and thrusting her witch's face close to his, shook his head till it seemed to him that every one of his teeth was permanently loosened from its setting. He tore himself away at last, and fled down to the gate that his friends were holding open for him. But that was not the end. William's cab had been shaken off, and with horror they now saw Mrs. Maloney pick it up, carry it up to her door, and fling it down furiously and contemptuously upon the bench outside. The outlaws held a hasty meeting. It was unthinkable to go home in defeat, leaving their leader's cap in the hands of the enemy. They would never hold up their heads again. They discussed plans, standing in the middle of the road, watched suspiciously by the enemy from her back door, where she still kept guard over her trophy. "We're got to get it back," said Ginger sternly. "It's William's cap, so I votes William goes in and gets it back." "Yes, you'd feel like going back," said William bitterly, "if she'd shook everything loose in your head. All the bones and muscles and brains and things that oughter be sticking together's all loose all over the place. You don't know what it feels like." William, being literally shaken from his position of leadership, and being able to discuss nothing but the hypothetical condition of the inside of his head, Ginger evolved a masterly plan. He found a long stick, and while William, Douglas, and Henry drew down the enemy to the gate, by short and daring excursions into the garden as if in attempt at rescue, Ginger leant over the hedge by the side of the cottage and fished up William's cap with his stick. The outlaws then marched off, yelling triumphantly, carrying William's cap proudly upon the end of the stick, while its late captor gibbered at them over the gate in inarticulate rage. It was a half-holiday, and after, at his mother's earnest request, removing as much ink from his face and hands as could be removed by that hurried process known to William as washing, he sat down to lunch with a clear conscience. "Half-holiday," he murmured, "and I've done my homework. At least," he qualified his assertion, "I've done some of it. The good has often entered into bones." "What are you talking about, William?" said his mother. "And your face isn't clean yet." "Well, I've done all I can to it," said William virtuously. "I've washed it." He threw a glance at his reflection in the glass. "You ought to be able to tell by my hair that I've washed it." William's hair stood up round his face in damp vertical spikes. "Go and brush it, William," said Mrs. Brown wearily. "Well, you know," said William, as though delivering a final, deeply considered judgment, "I've sometimes thought it's best to let your hair grow the way it grows naturally. Some hair grows flat naturally. Then you ought to brush it flat. But mine doesn't. It naturally grows up like this, and I've sometimes thought it's better to leave it to grow its own way. It's more natural if—" "Go and brush it, William," said Mrs. Brown. William went slowly upstairs. He came down, his hair sleek and plentifully damped, murmuring, Friends, Rome, and countrymen, lend me some ears. I come to, well, anyway, the evil and the good men do lives into 'em." "Now, William, stop talking nonsense and eat your lunch," said Mrs. Brown, patiently. "That's just what I think," said William, "and yet he's got statues put up to him, and no end of a fuss." After a hearty meal, William set out joyously to join his companions. They had made no plans for the afternoon. They usually left things to fate, and fate seldom failed to provide them with an exciting program. They had arranged to meet at the corner of the road that led to Ginger's house. William was early at the trysting place. There was nothing to be seen at the corner but a car, and in the car were a weeping young woman and a sleeping old man. William stood and gaped. The weeping young woman was astonishingly beautiful, and William, in spite of his professed scorn of the feminine sex, was very susceptible to beauty. William blinked and coughed. The young woman turned sapphire blue, swimming eyes to him and gulped. "Say, kid," she said with an American twang and intonation that completed the enslavement of William, "say, kid, what's the name of this little old town?" William was too much confused to reply for a moment. During that moment fresh tears welled up into the blue eyes. "I feel just like nothing," sobbed the lady. "I've lost the way, and I've lost the map, and I don't know where I am, and Pop's gone to sleep, and I don't know where I've got to." "Where did you want to get to?" asked William. "Stratford," said the lady. "Stratford-on-Avon, that Shakespeare guy's place. If we don't do it today, we'll never do it. We've not got one single other day left, and it'll kill me not to do it. Everyone I know's done it, and to go back home and say I've not seen Stratford, well, I'd never hold up my head again, never, and I've lost the way, and the map, and Pop's gone to sleep, and—" She ended in a sob that reduced William's already melting heart to complete liquefaction. "It's all right," he said consolingly. He didn't mean anything in particular. It was only a vague expression of sympathy and comfort. But the lady looked at him, her eyes suddenly alight with hope. "You mean," she gasped, "you mean this is Stratford? Oh, how dandy! Do you really mean that?" Stronger and older characters than William would have decided to mean that when fixed by those pleading, hopeful blue eyes. "Yes," said William after a moment's silence, which represented a short, victorious struggle with a never very recalcitrant conscience. "This is Stratford, all right." The lady leapt in her seat. Gone were all traces of tears. "Say, kid, I just adore you. Now I've got to see it all just as quick as I can. Never mind Pop, he can go on sleeping. He hates looking at things anyway. He goes to sleep on purpose." She opened the door and jumped down. "Now, the first thing I want to see is Anne Hathaway's cottage. Can you direct me to that, little boy? Or, say, are you doing anything particular this afternoon?" "No," said the unscrupulous William, deciding that Ginger, Henry, and Douglas would get on very well without him. "Well, now, would you be a real cherub and personally conduct me?" "Yes, I would," said William eagerly. He did not repent his rash statement as to the precise locality of Stratford-on-Avon. He almost believed it. If this vision wished it to be Stratford, it was Stratford. They set off down the road together. "Is it far?" said the fair American eagerly. William began to consider. He realized that he had embarked upon an adventure that would require careful handling. But William was not the boy to retire from any adventure before he was compelled. He looked up and down the road. "Whose cottage did you say?" he said at last. "Anne Hathaway's?" "No, it's not far now," said William, hoping for the best. The lady became confidential. She told him that her name was Miss Burford, Sadie Burford, and she just loved this little old country, but Stratford was the thing she longed most passionately to see, and this was the happiest day of her life, and wasn't it just the cutest little place, and she'd be grateful to him all her life, she would sure. William enjoyed it. He enjoyed walking with her. He enjoyed watching her astounding beauty. He enjoyed her twang. He was already practicing it silently in his mind. They turned the bend in the road, and there in front of them was Mrs. Maloney's cottage. Miss Burford gave a little scream of ecstasy. "Thatched!" she said. "This must be Anne Hathaway's cottage." "Yes, this is it," agreed William, torn between relief at having discovered an Anne Hathaway's cottage and consternation at the prospect of a second rencontre with Mrs. Maloney in one day. He could see Mrs. Maloney looking out of the window. William, as an artist, occasionally overreached himself. He made the mistake of not leaving well alone. Now, wishing to give a further touch of verisimilitude to the whole situation, he said carelessly, "And there's Anne Hathaway looking out of the window." "Does Anne Hathaway still live here?" said Miss Burford excitedly. "Well, I thought that was what you said," said William, bewildered. "But I meant the one that lived hundreds of years ago." William was still more bewildered. "She'll be dead by now," he said after a slight pause, but he wished the radiant vision to have everything she wanted. If she wanted an Anne, whatever it was, she should have it. "There's another living there now," he went on. "How dandy!" said Miss Burford. "A descendant, I suppose." "Oh, yes," agreed William. "Yes, that's what she is." "Well, I've got to hurry. Will you knock, or shall I? Perhaps you know her." "Oh, yes, I know her all right," stammered William, edging away as he spoke, his eyes fixed fearfully upon the cottage door. You don't want her go right in, do you?" "I sure do," asserted Miss Burford. "I wouldn't if I was you," said William earnestly. "I wouldn't go. She's awful bad-tempered, Mrs. Maloney is. I mean Anne, what you said is." "But I must go in. People do, I know." "Better not," said William desperately. She's deaf, too." "But I can shout." "That's no use. She can't hear shouting, and she's mad, too. She's sort of forgotten her name. She sort of thinks she's someone else. So it's no use going in, what with her being deaf and mad. It's not really safe, and it's best from outside. It's not anything like as nice inside as it is outside." "But I've known people who've gone inside," persisted Miss Burford. "I've known them personally. It must be possible. It can't be very dangerous." She advanced boldly and knocked at the door. William stood in the background, palely composed, but ready to flee if necessary. The door opened a few inches, and Mrs. Maloney's wrinkled face appeared round it. At sight of William, it became distorted with rage. "Bah!" she growled. "You little pest, ye—" William, whose valor was wholesomely intermingled with discretion, was on the point of turning to flee and leaving this strange situation to disentangle itself as best it could, when he saw Miss Burford slip something into Mrs. Maloney's hand, at which Mrs. Maloney's wrath simmered down into a sullen distrust. "Could I," said Miss Burford, with disarming sweetness, "could I just look at your historical cottage, Miss Hathaway?" "Hysterical yourself," snapped the owner, "and my name's Mrs. Maloney, I'll have you to know." Miss Burford turned to William with a sad smile. "Poor woman," she whispered. Then she entered the kitchen. Mrs. Maloney stood holding her 10-shilling note with both hands and watching her guest suspiciously. William's sole thought was to keep as near the door as possible in view of possible developments. Miss Burford looked round at the old-fashioned cottage, the old dresser, and the flagged floor, with a sigh of rapture. "How lovely!" she breathed. "How perfect!" Mrs. Maloney's suspicions deepened. Then Miss Burford looked rather puzzled. "I've seen photographs of it. I've sure got a wretched memory, but I had an idea there was more things in it, somehow. I've only a vague kind of idea of it, but I certainly thought there were more things in it." In his capacity of stage manager, William spoke up with desperate boldness. "There was," he said. "There was a lot more things, but they had to take him away when she got like this." "Eh?" said Mrs. Maloney sharply. "What's he saying?" "Nothing, nothing," said Miss Burford pacifically. But the suspicious rage upon the old lady's face was not without effect. Miss Burford herself began to edge hastily towards the door. Mrs. Maloney, purple-faced, uttered a threatening sound expressive of fury, and Miss Burford, throwing dignity to the winds, followed William's already fleeing figure. "How awful!" she panted, when they had reached the safe refuge of the road. "Poor woman! She's sure plumb crazy. But," with a sigh of content, "I've seen it. That's all I wanted to do. I can say I've seen it now." She took from her pocket a little notebook, opened it, and ticked off Stratford and Anne Hathaway's cottage. "There! Now I don't care how soon Pop takes me home." "I've not brought my guidebook," went on Miss Burford to William, "but I reckon there's other things I oughter see in Stratford." She looked across a field and caught sight of the stream that made its sluggish way through William's native village. "The Avon," she said with an ecstatic sigh. "Isn't it just dandy? But now, say, kid, isn't there anything else I ought to see belonging to Shakespeare? I suppose now," wistfully, "there aren't any other of his folks about the place, kind of descendants, you know." The adventure seemed to be drawing to a close, and William did not want it to draw to a close. The beautiful sapphire eyes fixed on him wistfully had a strange effect on him. Before he knew what he was saying, he said modestly, "Well, there's me. I'm one of his folks." He was secretly aghast when he heard himself say that, but he merely continued to gaze at her with his most ingenuous expression. "Well, now," she cried in rapture, "isn't that just luck? You're one of his descendants. But not in the direct line, I reckon?" If William was going to be a descendant at all, he was most certainly going to do the thing properly. "Oh, yes," he said, "I'm direct all right." "Then you're related to the old lady," she said excitedly. Again this took William out of his depth. He replied to it only by an uncertain smile. "Fancy," said Miss Burford, "fancy that! I reckon you've got letters and records and relics of your house." "Oh, yes, no end of them," said William, "all over the place." Miss Burford thrilled visibly. "I guess I was plumb lucky to strike you first go off," she said. She looked at William almost with reverence. "I can see a most distinct likeness," she said at last. "I reckon, kid, you've been simply brought up on him, haven't you? I expect you just about know his works by heart." "Oh, yes," said William, and quoted dreamily, "'Friends, Rome and countrymen, lend me some ears. I come to bury Caesar in his grave. The evil what he did is in his bones. The good has entered. He had a vague suspicion that he had gone wrong somewhere, and began again, "'Friends, Rome and countrymen.'" But Miss Burford was delighted. "Fancy," she said at last, "fancy! I once read The Tempest. He wrote that, didn't he? Or am I thinking of The Rivals? But I couldn't ever remember a line. What's your name?" "William." "Of course," she breathed. "After him, of course." At that minute Ginger, Henry, and Douglas appeared. They stood in a row gazing with interest at William's new friend. William felt that their presence needed accounting for. "Friends of mine," he introduced them laconically. Miss Burford turned to them. "I'm just congratulating William," she said, "on his famous ancestor." William was never one to grudge honors to his friends. "They're all famous descendants, too," he said graciously. William's acquaintance with classical poets was limited, but he did his best. "Scott's and Douglas Wordsworth and Henry's." He left the realm of poets in disgust for one with which he was more familiar. "Henry's Nelson's." Miss Sadie Burford had come over to England with the firmly fixed impression that it was a country in which anything might happen, and her expectations were being gloriously fulfilled. "Well, isn't that just dandy?" she burst out with enthusiasm. "I'm just thrilled. Now we're all going to William's home, where he's going to show me some of those wonderful relics." William was nonplussed. The situation was growing beyond him. He was rather pale as he walked along the road with her. Ginger, Douglas, and Henry hadn't the remotest idea what was happening, but they gladly joined the party so as to be in any excitement that might be going. Excitement was never far away from William. Miss Burford was the only happy member of the party. She chattered joyously about the Avon and Anne Hathaway's cottage, and the Tempest, and the strong family likeness between William and the Bard of Avon. In a futile attempt to postpone the fatal moment of exposure, William resolutely led the party past the turning that led to his home. But Ginger, ever obtuse, called out lustily, "I say, if you're going to William's home, this is the way." William glared at him ferociously, then turned to Miss Burford with a sickly smile. He was beginning to wish he'd left her alone. She was pretty, but not pretty enough, he decided sternly, to make up for all this mess she was getting him into. I thought we'd go round home by the longer way," he said. Then, with a burst of inspiration, "so as to give a better view of the Avon." "What's the Avon?" said Henry innocently, and yelled with unnecessary loudness when William kicked him. William walked on one side of Miss Burford, Ginger on the other, Henry and Douglas behind. William's depression increased. To add to his troubles, Ginger was supplanting him in the Vision's favor. Ginger was prattling engagingly to the Vision about the details of his daily life, and the Vision was smiling at him affectionately. It was all very well for Ginger to prattle engagingly, thought William gloomily. She wasn't going to walk into Ginger's home and demand to see somebody's relics, whatever relics were. He couldn't put off the fateful moment any longer. At last the party came within sight of William's house. "Here's William's house," said Ginger gaily, leading the way into the gate. "Stop a minute," said William hoarsely. "I must just go in and ask." He hastened into the house and stood a moment in the hall, trying to evolve some plan. But for once he was at a loss. He could only stem the fatal tide. It would be easier to do something if he knew what relics meant. He returned, looking paler and fiercer than ever. "I'm afraid," he began, "I've just found out that they've hid away most of what you said." "Relics?" "Yes, that. Well, they've hid 'em away, case of burglars." This was an inspiration, but it failed of the desired effect. Miss Burford's countenance fell, but she did not retreat. "What a pity! Well, I'm just disappointed, but I quite understand.